Hello, and welcome to the Fearless Podcast, where we empower Iowa women to succeed in work and life. I'm one of your hosts, Emily Wood, joined by co-hosts Ladrina Wilson, Fearless editor Macy Shofroth, and some special guests today. Today, we want to talk about identity. And identity is complex, right? Some of the ways that we identify might be more obvious to others, maybe our race or our gender, but there are other parts of our identities that might not always be obvious, maybe disability or sexual orientation or religion, or whether we're from a rural or urban area. Sometimes different parts of our identity conflict, and sometimes people have different expectations of us because of our identity. To dig into this, we've invited special guests Nola Cartmill and Sylvia Nemmers to talk with us. Nola Cartmill is a lawyer, leader, and storyteller who serves as Chief Diversity Officer and Legal Counsel at Holmes Murphy, an insurance and benefits company. A Harvard Law graduate turned culture strategist, she helps organizations navigate the messy middle where people, policy, and purpose meet. She has been recognized nationally for her work in employment law and inclusion.
Today, we also have Sylvia Nemmers, and Sylvia holds a bachelor's degree and master's degree in biochemistry from Kansas State University and a doctorate in environmental science from New Mexico State University. She is the department chair for the largest environmental science program in the United States at American Public University Systems. She's also the founder of Beyond Limits LLC and published a book entitled Happy Now: Shattering the Myth of Happily Ever After. In the book, she explores her experience with living blind in a sighted world, as well as her journey from Christianity to Islam and beyond. I'm super excited to talk with the two of these women today. Both of you have amazing backgrounds, both on paper, but as well in real life and in the work that you do. And so I'm eager to hear a little bit more about your experiences. So maybe I'll start off with you, Sylvia. What aspects of your identity most shape how you move through the world?
I think by default, being blind really does impact how I move in the world because just a sidebar, there are two models for disability in the world. One is the physical model, which says there's a certain parameter of what healthy vision looks like, or anything else, but we'll just use vision today. And my vision doesn't fit into those parameters. So by that sense, I am blind and I am disabled. But there's the social model of disability, which says, well, my disability kind of appears because the world is designed for the standard way of seeing, which makes sense. But for example, real quick, the Alexa or Siri or Google devices, those are designed to not use vision. So I don't need any adaptive technology. And in that sense, my disability isn't really in play there. So being disabled, I think, definitely has impacted my life quite a bit. Figuring out how to move in the world, how to get to where I want to be. And now in this stage of my life, strengthening and empowering others to find their path to success as well.
Yeah, I appreciate the kind of noting that you're at a different point in your experience to where you're kind of bringing that next generation behind you. I'd love to dig into that when the moment is right, but also want to hear from Nola. Can you talk to us a little bit about what identities are kind of at the forefront or at play as you navigate the world?
I have to say, honestly, that being a Black woman is what shapes almost everything about how I experience the world. And part of that is because it's what people first see. So it's not something I can turn off or set aside. As you sort of indicated in the opening, there are lots of different identities that people never even see, but that's something that sort of precedes me in any room I step into. And it's how people read me before I ever speak. So that identity really comes with both a strength and a scrutiny. There's sort of this constant balancing act. I want to be seen for my skills and intellect, but I also know that the world kind of sees me through its own filters first and has certain expectations based on what they see before I really get to say anything. And, I really do think, though, that it gives me a certain type of perspective, right? And that shapes how I'm able to lead, how I parent, how I show up. It's not really a limitation to me. It's context and it's texture.
Yeah. Well, I think it's the dynamic that both of you guys are kind of putting out for us is there's what you experience, but then there's also these messages that the world sends you too about who you are and how you navigate the world. I can distinctively remember when, I guess it would have been the 2008 primary, when I lived in Illinois at the time. So it was Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama. And I went to the polls, and a man who had like 2 or 3 generations of people with him that he was helping go to vote looked at me as I walked into the polling station and said he could get my vote too. And in that moment, I realized for him, he saw me as Black, or more Black than he did female. And I'm like, this was a historic occasion, no matter which one, no matter which person you voted for. But, I guess I'm just sharing that from my experience. Sometimes the environment around you will dictate which identities you have to live out in front of them, or how they see you.
Absolutely. I just chime in there and say, that's why my company's name is Beyond Limits, because I really found that I needed to figure out a way to move past the limits that got set on me. So in high school, I was told, don't study science. You can't really do that. But then the limits maybe I place on myself as well. Having to find a way if I want to do it. So I think going beyond the limits, because I myself hesitated. I now use a guide dog. I hesitated so many years to get that guide dog because I felt the same way. The first thing somebody's going to know about me, even if they never speak a word to me, is that I'm blind. And there's certain, built-in ideas that people have. And the best way, I think, to work towards moving past those things is getting to know people from all the different ways of living. Because once we know people as humans, a lot of those preconceived notions melt away.
Right.
Speaking of some of those things that people think of you before, as you enter a room, Nola, I'm curious, from a professional experience standpoint, have you had times where you've walked into a job interview, or even just within a job that you're currently holding, where people have made, assumptions about you just in looking at you as you walk in the room?
I wish I could say no, but the answer is definitely, right? I've been in several meetings where people sort of assumed that I was the assistant that was there to get the coffee. And actually, once we got the meeting started, I was running the meeting. And so that makes sort of a little bit of an awkward situation. I remember distinctly one time we were going in for some pretrial hearings at the courthouse, and it was only lawyers in the room. 2 female lawyers on the other side, 2 female lawyers on my side. And so really sort of a historic moment, right? Like, I think the judge was female, and the court reporter comes out and she was like, oh, clients wait in the hallway. And it was just one of those moments that when you're trying to show up as your best self, right? I am showing up and I want to represent my clients. And I think sometimes people can sort of poo-poo those feelings, right? But the air, sort of the way that I deflated, right? Just in terms of somebody not seeing me for who I was dressed like every other lawyer in the room, right? And so there was no reason but for, and everyone else was a female too. So there was no reason but for the color of my skin to assume that I was not also a lawyer in the courtroom. And so I just, that is like etched in my mind as a moment that was sort of like, no matter what and this was far into my practice, I was like, no matter what I do, people, as we talked about earlier, people just see me in a certain light. And somewhat you have to sort of realize, hey, there's nothing I can do about that, but I can choose how I show up. And so, Mel Robbins, I read her Let Them book. And so let them make their own determinations about how you show up and who you are, and let me show you exactly who I am and exactly the skills that I have.
Yeah, it takes those experiences, though, for you to be able to get to a space where you can, your initial reaction, after you encounter it enough times, you kind of become desensitized or numb to it. So that kind of let me is a little bit more accessible after you've dealt with it and you go through your maturity and that type of thing. But I do think for people who are, navigating spaces where they're in the minority, and maybe they haven't been before, or maybe even young professionals, there's a whole set of psychological gymnastics that goes with that exact type of example, Nola, where it's like, okay, I have this thing lingering in the background that somebody thinks that I'm inferior, essentially, or that I'm the client and not the lawyer. And now I still have to go and do my job and do it well. Whereas other people aren't necessarily having that same experience where they're having to kind of compartmentalize what just happened over here and then get back to work. So I tip my hat to you, because I think that, the way you navigate it with grace and how you are able to move through that is important. But I also want to acknowledge, at least in my experience, it's not always easy.
I definitely agree. I'm not fully evolved, I will say. Like, those moments still hurt a little, right? It's sort of, opening a wound that is always still kind of there when that happens. But I talk about at work, and that's really why I am excited about the work that I get to do now as a chief diversity officer, is really making sure that people can show up fully, that they're not having to do the type of gymnastics that you're talking about to be seen, that really if people can be seen and not be focused on all of these other things that come with being them, that they can actually focus on the work and the work that you want them to do. And so that's really why I think the type of work that I do is still so very important, despite, current circumstances and what might be being said in the world.
Yeah, yeah. So, Sylvia, you also mentioned in your Fearless story that you've kind of had, we've struggled to navigate various job searches due to being blind. Is that because you've stopped out in the process, or is it because something that's happening in the process that's prohibiting you from moving forward? Can you just tell us a little bit more about that?
I find that my blindness, my PhD is environmental soil chemistry. In order to get that degree, I had to figure out solutions to so many different issues that nobody really had dealt with before, and I had to figure them out with some people on my team not really believing I could do it either. So I felt that built some character in me, like a problem solver, very tenacious, like very positive characteristics came out of this day-to-day life that I've had. And so at one point I put them on my LinkedIn because I thought, these are things that people should be looking for. No, I didn't get anything with that. Also, when I've gone and I've applied for jobs in person, no, it's hard for people to get past the idea of somebody who's blind has these degrees and everything on my resume is actually me. So at that point, because I was a bit younger in my career, I took all that stuff away. And I actually started working at online universities because my interview process would be through the phone or through something like this. And I could just be me, and I could hide that piece of me for a little while until I got the job. And then I could do the job for a couple months, and it was time to come for meetings or graduation, and I could declare it then. And I feel sad that that's the way it's had to go. Now that my career is more established, my LinkedIn page looks very different, and I'm very happy about that. But I do feel a sadness that that's the way I had to go to make it work for me.
Yeah. Do you think that people still feel like they have to hide parts of who they are, whether it's related to ability or, neurodivergence or other identities that people may have to show up? Like, you said it was earlier in your career. Do you think someone entering the world of work has to do that masking today?
I see a more diverse workforce at my university now than I did even 10 years ago. So I think that's very positive. But I think still that there are a lot of challenges with, if you have two equal candidates, the mind might go to, well, this person probably doesn't need accommodation. I don't know. I can't read other people's mind. But unfortunately, I think we're still there. But I think things like this, these activities where we discuss and we interact, maybe my presence at conferences and conventions and graduations, the more of us who are there being our authentic self and doing the work, I think no law can do what just interactions with other humans can do.
Right, right.
Well, thank you both for sharing about your experiences. And Nola, I'm curious, you're navigating your own identity in the workplace, but you're also leading efforts for the entire workplace and beyond to be navigating their own identities and creating a sense of belonging for everyone. So I'm wondering, how do you go about, these conversations about identity, creating this sense of inclusion within the workplace?
I think part of it is I've learned to be probably more vulnerable than I was at the beginning of my career, and somewhat sharing my own story helps to create the space for the conversation. And so a lot of times I use myself as an example, right? To your point, I'm having all of these conversations about belonging, but I'm navigating my own belonging as I do there. Just because someone gives you a title and puts you in an office doesn't necessarily make you less human. And so you're navigating all of the same things that other folks are. And often as you sort of go up the hierarchy in a corporation, right, you're in rooms where a lot of times you're the only person who looks like you. I sit here in Iowa, and so that is sort of our population. And so I think the best way that I can do that is open up and be vulnerable about how I'm navigating it. And then a lot of times I tell people it's easy when you hear it on TV or hear it in the news, when it's sort of these nameless, faceless people who are experiencing this thing, right? Like, oh, like we need to create belonging for others. But when it's the person who sits beside you, who sits in the office next to you, who's in the meeting with you, who's also navigating that space, they're like, oh, I get it, because now I'm hearing your personal story surrounding this. And now I can take the perspective of someone and, as much as I possibly can, right? None of us can sit in seats. I can't sit in Sylvia's seat. I don't know what it's like to be blind, but I can have a sort of perspective based on, oh, what would it feel like if people only saw me for one thing, right? And once you start opening up that conversation and having people see it as a human thing of someone that I know that is actually experiencing it, I think you open up the conversation just a lot more and you get people a lot more engaged.
I really love that. That is like, you're speaking like from my own heart right there. I actually, part of what I do with my Beyond Limits is I do speaking engagements. And one of my talks is called "The Path to Authenticity is Paved with Vulnerability." Because it's something you got to do it over and over and over again. And even then you're still sometimes going, but this is perfect. You said it exactly like I'm thinking it.
I think the interesting thing with this is, like, obviously I have shared values with all of the things that you guys are saying. It's integral to how I try to interact with people and the work that I do as well. But I also recognize that I feel like people understand authenticity, and people actually say they want it. I don't know, like, once they actually get it, if they know what to do with it. But I feel like vulnerability, specifically in the world of work, is not a form of currency that has as much value as some of these other leadership postures or ways of being in the world of work. And so I might be going a little off script here, but I do think this idea of being vulnerable when you are already in a position where people's biases are being projected onto you, or you're navigating that, like, it's hard to think about how to get there. So are there any policies or practices that the two of you have either experienced, created, or recognized that have value in the workplace that could help people, both the individual, but also companies, get better about, belonging and vulnerability and inclusion?
I think maybe your point is well taken, Ladrina, that, it's easy to say be vulnerable. And right, like, I've reached a certain stage in my career where I feel like I have the capacity to be more vulnerable maybe than I did when I was trying to climb the career ladder. And that's not always available to everyone. And I think what we do here is we've created spaces where vulnerability is not only expected, I guess I shouldn't say that it's expected, but it's celebrated, right? And so in terms of our employee resource groups, we also, I've done a company-wide, really finding people from different parts of our organization who are the only for whatever reason, but not only in the traditional sense of underrepresented, just, how the makeup of our company is. And so we had a white man who was on this call and talking about his career journey, but in the area that he works in, he was an only for a long time. And so creating those spaces where that vulnerability is celebrated, and that really gives permission for other people to do the same. And so a lot of times when I am being vulnerable, it's not always easy for me either. But I know that in the space that I sit in, if I am vulnerable and I show that, and I create spaces where that is celebrated for other folks, that allows people to feel like they have the permission to do the same. But also just in terms of training leaders, right? Don't start your one-on-one with like, hey, what does your to-do list look like, right? Ask people how their week is and really care, right? I mean, I talk about micro moments a lot. It's not big stuff. Big stuff is not what creates the culture. It's not what make people feel like they belong. It's the little stuff. It's, I always talk about people walk in the hall and they see somebody and they say, hey, how are you doing? And they're like to the bathroom by the time you say I'm good, because that was the expected response. And so it's sort of like stopping, looking someone in the face, actually hearing their answer, looking them, because if you're looking at them, they might say I'm good, but you might see in their face that they're not. And then you say, but are you really? And that's where you create the conversation. So it's really those micro moments and creating the space for them, talking about them. I think probably, again, I don't know that there's a policy or a practice, but really just naming it and saying that this is the stuff that really works, and we got to do the small stuff to ever get to the big stuff.
And for me, I mean, we have the Americans with Disability Act. So that guarantees a certain level of, if I request an accommodation and it's a reasonable accommodation. And so there's the piece of the legal piece that is there to support me. But I don't know if your parents ever told you this, but when I was a child trying to fit into the world, there were kids that didn't like me and some that were more receptive. And my parents were like, just be yourself, and the people that want to be around you will be there, which is okay for personal life. This is a bigger struggle in professional life. I have worked at several universities, and some have been much better than others at being able, for me to be able to be my authentic self. Where I work now is really spectacular, which is why I'm here and I'm staying here. And me being able to be vulnerable has helped me also grow as a leader, because now I look at my team. Now I have a team of around 50 people that I work with. And I also try to see them as individuals. And instead of dividing the workload like a pie into equal pieces, just like everyone gets a slice, I'm going to say, well, this person they really lean into this part of it. And I talk to them, as a team and individually in our one-on-ones about which things are, more of a struggle. We try to divvy things up according to, we all have to do things sometimes that are a little bit less desirable for ourselves, but I really try to lean into you, leaning into what you is efficient for you, what you love doing, what's like, for example, Excel spreadsheets are just hard for me. I'll do them. I can do them. But if someone else on my team is like, I can do that in 5 minutes and it'll take me 3 hours, let's be efficient. So seeing individuals individually and seeing their uniqueness can help. My team is now really very well known. We get stuff done and we are always having a good time doing it. And I think it has to do with that added dose of vulnerability and authenticity.
So you both have kind of mentioned, your own evolution with vulnerability as you've gone on in your careers. I'm curious for the listeners out there who are maybe in the beginning stages, maybe don't have the courage to do that yet. Could you mention a time where you had to advocate for yourself, maybe earlier in your career, and what that looked like to maybe give encouragement to others?
Well, I'll tell you, mine started from the very beginning. In high school, I was told you can't study science, and I wasn't even allowed to take the college prep math and science courses. And in that time, I didn't have my voice as much. So I just agreed to what they allowed me to take. And then when I got to college, I found out that there were, more things I could rely on as far as advocating for myself. So I learned more about the legal part of it and what I could request. But even when I started my PhD program, you have to take a qualifying exam to even get into the program, which I did, and I did well on. So I met with the group that was going to be my team, with my department, with my department chair, the chair of my program of my studies, and the other team. And someone on the team was like, "I know you passed the exam, but I just don't think you're going to be able to get a job in this field." And I had to, many years down the road, I was able to go back and say, I think your job here is to evaluate my ability to be successful in this program. It's really up to me to navigate how and what kind of job I get. And you start to, you that balance between wanting to be forceful and definite about what you want without becoming off as like aggressive or stern. It's, especially being a woman, there's always that. So it is an evolution. And I think for me, my father was the president of Organizations for the Blind, and so I had a lot of role models. And I think finding mentors and role models that are further in their career is a great support for moving in that direction.
And I'm going to be probably a little bit vulnerable in saying I'm still maybe not as good at advocating for myself as I should be. I think the way that I maybe navigate it is it's much easier for me to advocate for others, right? And so in terms of how sometimes it is something that would benefit me, but it's much easier for me to ask for something for someone else than it is to ask for something for myself. And it's something I'm still working on. But I would say the other thing is relationships, right? And so probably in the sense that I would advocate for myself, I just build relationships with people. I build relationships with people who will say my name in rooms that, I'm not in, who will advocate for me on my behalf, right? I show up as a genuine and authentic person. I hope that people like, and that has served me well in terms of creating relationships so that when the time comes for advocacy and someone needs to advocate on my behalf, a lot of times I have people working in the background to do what sometimes is still uncomfortable for me to do for myself.
Yeah. Again, it goes back to this like simple but not easy, right? Like it's simple to say like, oh yeah, just speak up. But it in the moment, it's not always easy. And what I hear like kind of as a thread between the two of you is like, you know what the right thing to do is. You've had people either model it for you and now you're able to model it for them, or you know what you would say for someone else in that situation, and you lived your life in a way to where people will actually speak up on your behalf as well. I feel compelled to also contribute to this because I navigate the world as a Black woman, and I consider myself an ally to folks who have other marginalized identities, and I feel like calling out behavior and calling in behavior are important strategies, and knowing when the right time to call something out is, like in front of people, or to call someone in for a conversation. And I think when people have done something that, I try to trust people's intention, but I still believe they're responsible for whatever their impact is. And so it's, to me, if I know you've done something that crosses the line, doesn't model the type of behavior or values that I think the organization espouses, that needs to either be called in or called out. And I think that can happen no matter where you're at in the organization. You may have to call it out to your supervisor, who then needs to speak up and say something, depending on where you're at. But I do feel like us, as in the Midwest, situated here, we don't like to outwardly, or at least generally speaking, we don't like to outwardly offend people. And so if you let it ride, people will think a joke is a joke and they might do it again. If you don't speak up, you run the risk of that person thinking that it's okay. And so I just hope that people can find a way to embrace radical honesty. Doesn't mean you have to be nasty about it, but you're the expert in your lived experience. And if you experience something that's worth speaking on because it'll stop it for somebody else down the road, I think it's important people, women, boys, girls, them, they, whoever, we just have to speak our truths. And the more we do it early, the less uncomfortable we'll be later. I really appreciate the two of you sharing your perspectives. sharing your experience and your time with us. I could talk to you two all day, and I probably will reach out to both of you offline, because I definitely want to get to know a little bit more about you. And then also, Sylvia, I know you have a book, and I'd like to hear more about that at some point. But I do think you guys have a very interesting perspectives that you bring to today's conversation. Well, thank you for joining us. It's time for us to bring Macy's Fearless Focus segment to the forefront. Macy, who do you have with us today?
Thank you, Ladrina. Today, Abi Reiland will be joining us. Abi is an entrepreneur and commercial real estate professional. Recognized as a CoStar Power Broker Top Deal Award recipient, Abi brings exceptional market insight and a reputation for delivering outstanding client experiences. She serves as a board member for the Young Women's Resource Center and Commercial Real Estate Women, and she's passionate about advancing opportunities for women in commercial real estate. For Fearless, I recently wrote about Abi's event, Taking Up Space, a panel and networking event aimed at elevating and empowering businesswomen in Central Iowa, which also Nola happened to be a panelist on. So Abi, with your founding of Taking Up Space, you've created an event that really speaks to the experiences of many different women and types of women and women with different identities as they navigate work and life. What would your advice be for Des Moines leaders who are planning engagement events for women to ensure they are offering something that can benefit women from all walks of life and all identities?
Yeah, I think culturally we tend to spend a lot of time talking. And I think in putting this event together, listening became the focus. I think listening to women that I met with, friends, family, peers, and hearing where there were kind of gaps in support, in sort of building up that identity. I know as women, we face a lot of really unique obstacles in the workplace. And so in putting the event together, it was really important to me to not only make a panel of entirely women, but to make sure that we had some diversity as females on that panel as well. And I think the ability of those panelists to speak to different experiences, different industries, and both personally and professionally, kind of their journey is really important. And I think it lands with the audience well because there's just this wide breadth of knowledge.
Yeah. And this was the third edition of Taking Up Space. What have you learned, and how has that process evolved as you've done this a few times now?
Yeah, I definitely learned from mistakes, I would say. I think the most important part to me was always having a really unique group of women that could speak again to different experiences. And I've had comments from people in the past that said, maybe this could be really big, maybe you make it bigger. And one thing that's really important is I think the intimacy of the event itself, the smaller group, we cap it at right around 165. I think it allows women to connect on a personal level during the networking portion of it at the beginning. And it also opens up the ability to go talk to the panelists afterwards, which I know in many cases when it's a really large event, that's just not a possibility. And so instead of getting kind of lost in the shuffle and getting your ticket and waiting in line and doing the thing, it feels like a bit more of a personal experience.
I love that. And I think that really relates to that authenticity conversation we just had with our panelists. So, Abi, thank you for sharing that advice with us. And of course, thank you for always doing all the work you do in elevating and empowering Central Iowa women. And with that, I'm going to have Ladrina come back and wrap us up.
Thanks for today's guest. You guys were wonderful. I really just appreciate how Abi, Nola, and Sylvia have been able to give perspectives on how to create and cultivate spaces for women of all walks of life, how to access vulnerability, but also to be comfortable in your own skin and recognize that while you are different, it doesn't mean that you are deficient, and your multiplicity of identities have value and space that they can take up in the workplace. So I loved hearing everyone's thoughts today. I thank everyone for joining us. And remember, to our listeners, be bold, be brilliant, and be fearless.